Rob Hall, the guide who stayed too long and paid with his life. His last words were to his pregnant wife, patched through a satellite phone from 28,000 feet. "I love you. Sleep well, my sweetheart." 12 hours later, he was dead. And the worst part? He never should have been up there in the first place. This is the story of Rob Hall, one of the greatest mountain guides who ever lived, and how his own rules, the ones that kept him alive for years, were the same rules he broke on the day he died. A story about leadership, client pressure, and the moment when doing the right thing for someone else becomes the worst possible thing for everyone. Rob Hall didn't just die on Everest. He made a series of choices that killed him, and understanding those choices might save your life someday. The legend. Before we talk about how Rob Hall died, you need to understand who Rob Hall was. Because this wasn't some amateur who got in over his head. This was the guy everyone else looked up to. Rob Hall was a New Zealander who started climbing as a teenager. By his mid-20s, he had already summited Everest multiple times. In 1990, he co-founded Adventure Consultants, a guiding company that became the gold standard for commercial Everest expeditions. His record was incredible. Between 1990 and 1995, he guided 39 clients to the summit of Everest. 39 people who might never have made it without him. He was methodical, careful, professional. He had rules, strict rules, and he followed them religiously. The most important rule was the turnaround time. If you haven't reached the summit by 2 p.m., you turn around. No exceptions, no negotiations. The weather on Everest changes fast, and being caught high on the mountain after dark is a death sentence. Rob Hall had enforced that rule for years. He had turned clients around when they were within sight of the summit. He had made enemies because of that rule. But it kept people alive until May 10th, 1996, the day he broke it. The setup. The 1996 spring season was crowded. Multiple expeditions were all targeting the same summit window. Rob Hall's Adventure Consultants team was there. So was Scott Fisher's Mountain Madness team. Several other groups too. In total, over 30 climbers were going for the top on May 10th. Rob's team included several paying clients, each of whom had spent around $65,000 for the privilege of being guided up the world's highest peak. Among them was Doug Hansen, a postal worker from Washington State. Doug Hansen was a special case. He had attempted Everest the year before with Rob Hall's team. He had gotten close, within 300 feet of the summit, before Rob made the call to turn everyone around. The weather was closing in. They were running out of time. Doug had to go back down, heartbroken, having spent years saving for a dream that slipped through his fingers. He came back in 1996 to try again. Same guide, same mountain, same dream. Rob Hall knew how much this meant to Doug, and that knowledge would prove fatal. The climb. Summit day started before midnight on May 9th. Climbers left high camp in the dark, headlamps bobbing up the mountain like a string of Christmas lights. Problems started almost immediately. The route wasn't properly fixed. Ropes that should have been in place weren't there. Climbers were stacking up at the Hillary step, waiting in line, burning through their oxygen while standing still. Rob Hall's turnaround time came and went. 2 p.m., then 3 p.m., then 4 p.m. Some clients had already summited and started back down. But Doug Hansen was still climbing, slowly, painfully. The postal worker from Washington was giving everything he had to reach that summit. Rob Hall could have turned him around. That was his job. That was his rule. But he didn't. Doug Hansen reached the summit sometime after 4 p.m. Way too late, dangerously late. By the time he started his descent, the weather was already changing, and Rob Hall stayed with him. The storm. What happened next is still being reconstructed from radio calls, survivor accounts, and educated guesses. A massive blizzard hit the mountain. Winds over 70 miles per hour. Visibility near zero. Temperatures dropping to -40. Climbers all over the mountain were suddenly fighting for their lives. Rob Hall and Doug Hansen were caught high on the southeast ridge, somewhere near the Hillary step. Doug collapsed. He couldn't go any further. Rob Hall was faced with a choice that no guide should ever have to make. Leave Doug and save himself, or stay and try to help. He stayed. The radio calls that came through that night are haunting. Rob Hall, one of the most experienced mountaineers in the world, was stuck at 28,000 feet with a dying client, no oxygen, and no way down. Other climbers tried to reach him. Sherpas made heroic attempts to climb up with supplies. But the storm was too intense. The altitude was too high. Nobody could get to him. Doug Hansen died sometime during the night. The exact time is unknown. The exact circumstances are unknown. All we know is that by morning, Rob Hall was alone. The last call. On the morning of May 11th, Base Camp managed to patch a satellite phone call through to Rob Hall's wife, Jan Arnold, in New Zealand. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child. The conversation was brief. Rob Hall was hypothermic, frostbitten, and barely coherent. But he told her he loved her. He asked her to name their daughter Sarah. "Sleep well, my sweetheart. Please don't worry too much." Those were among his last known words. He died sometime later that day, still sitting in the snow near the south summit. The question that haunts everything. Why did Rob Hall break his own rule? He had spent years turning clients around. He had made the hard call dozens of times. He knew better than anyone what happens when you stay too high for too long. But Doug Hansen wasn't just any client. He was a man who had sacrificed everything for this dream. A postal worker who had saved for years. A guy who had come so close the year before and had to turn back. Rob Hall let emotion override judgment. He let his care for Doug Hansen, his empathy, his desire to help this man achieve his dream, override the rule that existed for exactly this situation. And it killed them both. The leadership question. Rob Hall's death raises uncomfortable questions about leadership and responsibility. As a guide, his job was to keep his clients alive. That meant making decisions they might hate. That meant being the bad guy sometimes. That meant enforcing the turnaround time, even when your client is crying and begging for just one more hour. Rob Hall knew all of this. He had done it before. But in the moment, with Doug Hansen struggling toward the summit, he couldn't do it. Some people call that compassion. Some people call that weakness. Either way, it was the wrong decision. The commercial Everest industry runs on a fundamental tension. Clients pay enormous amounts of money for their chance at the summit. Guides need successful summits to attract future clients. There's pressure, constant, relentless pressure, to say yes instead of no. Rob Hall resisted that pressure for years. On May 10, 1996, he gave in. The aftermath. Rob Hall's body remained on the mountain for years. Climbers passing the south summit could see him there, frozen in place, a permanent reminder of what happens when you stay too long. His daughter Sarah was born 3 months after his death. Jan Arnold raised her alone, with the satellite phone recording of her husband's last words as the only voice Sarah would ever hear. Adventure consultants continued operating after Rob's death. The Everest guiding industry continued growing. More climbers, more money, more pressure. The lessons of May 10, 1996 have been studied, analyzed, and written about in books, documentaries, and academic papers. Everyone agrees on what went wrong. And yet, every year, guides still push turnaround times. Clients still pressure for more. The mountain keeps taking lives. Rob Hall was a legend. He did everything right for years. And then, on one day, he did everything wrong. That's the tragedy of leadership. You can be excellent 1,000 times, but the one time you're not might be the last time that matters. If this story hit you hard, watch this next one. It's just as tragic.